Hello, everyone. I'm Ms. Jin Tang and Mr. Việt Nguyen, and thank you for having us all here to have the first discussions for the first sessions. And the first topic will be funding strategies, and I am Haling, the CMO and co-founder of Go Yam Thai and Hao La, which is a Sichuan restaurant concept. And I will be the moderator today. So let me talk a bit about the overview of the session first before we get into the discussions. So throughout the sessions, we have agreed that we're going to be all discussed in English. So hope you guys are okay with that. So for the funding sessions, despite experiencing fluctuation in the first half of the year, Vietnam F&B industry remains poised for significant growth, presenting abundant opportunities for both domestic and international F&B enterprises, making Vietnam a highly competitive and lucrative market. These sessions will explore the evolving funding landscape, providing us today with valuable insights into the strategy and opportunities available for F&B business seeking investment. Attendees will hear from industry experts and successful entrepreneurs who have navigated the funding process, sharing their experiences and lessons learned today. As me, I'm the entrepreneurs in F&B, and we haven't been through the process of funding, so it would be a good chance for me to learn from the two speakers today as well. So please give us some introductions first. Is it okay? And maybe we start with Ms. Jin Tang, please.
Good afternoon, take two. So I'm Yin, and I am the CEO and co-founder of the Beacon Fund. I guess there's two things you should probably know about Beacon that are a bit different. So number one, we're a private debt fund. So as opposed to a private equity fund like Viet or a venture capital fund. Why private debt? I will certainly be able to get into that more over the course of this discussion. But essentially, we realized there was a gap in funding for companies that didn't necessarily have that, say, like tech element or hyperscale capability that many VCs are looking for. At the same time, they were too small for private equity, and also they were unable to access debt funding from the banks, right, for different reasons. So I think that's why we decided several years ago to launch a private debt fund in Vietnam, which I believe is one of the first of its kind in the market. I think the second thing you should know about us is that we are an impact investing fund. What does that mean? So we're looking for companies that have a positive social environmental impact, right, in the F&B space. That could look like, providing high quality jobs for frontline staff, right, which do tend to be, let's say, very vulnerable seasonal jobs with very high turnover. So I think looking at companies who are investing in high quality training, retention programs for their team. It could also look like embracing sustainability in the supply chain as well, and reducing wastage and plastic. So as for F&B, we are a sector agnostic fund, but we have made 2 investments in the F&B space out of our 11 investments in Vietnam, and really happy to be here today and share more about our work.
Thank you, Ms. Jin Tang. And how about Mr. Việt Nguyen?
Hi, everyone. I'm Việt Nguyen. I'm director of Vietnam Investment Groups, and we are one of the very early private equity funds in Vietnam, established in 2007. We have been in markets and heavily focusing on consumer sectors, healthcare, educations, and one of them has been F&B. So we now control, manage, and operate our investment through more than 700 stores across about 10 brands. What we learned about the sector is that Vietnamese middle class has been growing significantly over the last 10 years, and the demand for F&B has always been one of the core necessity service and always been growing. Strong demands from even the Gen Zs and the new generations to come. So we are very happy to be involved in the sectors and drive to the growth of next coming up years.
Thank you so much. And we had the first questions, I think everyone here want to hear about. So for you, what are the current trends in funding for F&B business in Vietnam? And how do you assess the potential growth of the Vietnamese F&B market? So may I ask Ms. Jin Tang first?
Sure, I can start. So I guess I might start with a bit of a maybe unpopular or maybe more controversial opinion, which is I would say F&B right now actually faces a lot of skepticism from investors, if I'm very honest. I guess maybe let's just put it out there, right, to have a frank discussion about that. I guess why is that, right? And I think this is in many discussions that I've had with, I guess, our peer investors, both in Vietnam and across the region. I think it stems from the fact that, this F&B, particularly, I guess, food service, say, or restaurants, cafes, right? I mean, there are relatively low barriers to entry, right? I think we see this in our daily lives, right? As we're walking down the street around our office or around our homes, right? Every few weeks, right, there's some new restaurant that's popped up, another one shut down, and I think it's really constantly changing landscape, right? And so not to say it's impossible, but I think that there is definitely some skepticism about, which kind of, brands can really stand the test of time, right, and build something for the long term, right, which is, I guess, usually what investors are looking for with their strategies. So I think we see it, right? We've seen the trends come and go. We've seen bubble tea. We've seen fried chicken, right? I got pictures like that, I think, just in the last couple of weeks, right? And I think the question is always, what's the sustainable competitive advantage for these, companies?
So what elements you would think for accessing sustainable business in terms of F&B?
Correct. And what are the barriers to entry, right? What's stopping some copycat, which could somehow raise more money than you or be better funded from setting up and frankly, just copying your idea, which is a little unfortunate, right? But I think, unfortunately, a reality of our market, right, that we're in. And I'm sure you've experienced this too, right, as an entrepreneur. That said, though, I think we have, invested in the F&B sector. So it's not like, we're not interested at all. I think, let me give an example maybe of a company which we did invest in, where we really saw that kind of sustainable competitive advantage and edge. It's a company called Lotus Group. Maybe you may not have heard of it, right? But I would say you certainly have heard of some of the brands that it operates in Vietnam. So it operates Japanese food concepts such as Marakame Udon, Coco Ichibanya, right, Yoshinoya, I think some of the best known franchise brands, right, in the industry. And I guess, I think that was what really impressed us about, this founding or management team, right? They were able to win exclusive franchise rights, right, for these concepts in Vietnam, right? Well-established brands with a great track record of success in many countries across the world. And they did that through, I guess, a lot of operational excellence, right? They really proved to these Japanese partners that they could deliver in Vietnam to very high standards, right, with these franchises. And, I think, and that really blew us away. The other great thing, or I think one learning that I think both of us had as we looked at the F&B industry, is that, many of these companies, they start with as, franchising models, right, first, and then layer on their own concepts, right? But they do have a diversified portfolio of brands in their suite. So this company, Lotus, there's 8 different brands. It ranges from very mass, right, to high-end concepts, right, anywhere from less than $100,000 per meal, right, to north of $1 million, right? So covering many different segments of the market, right? And that makes it very resilient to, I think the ups and downs that these businesses inevitably face. That's one maybe example of, I guess, some of the challenges, but I think also some of the ways that we think a F&B business can really succeed and thrive.
Thank you. And how about Mr. Viet Nguyen? Because I see that VIG also invested quite a few brands in F&B business. So what are your tastes?
I just want to have a quick share on private equities and how's our look. Because typically for our funds, for example, we are about 10 years funds. And as a private equity, we need to invest and we need to exit. So some of our exit options going to be another private equities, and they also have 10 years time horizons. We also exit to the strategic partners. So the time frame that we are looking at the investors are typically about 10 years or 20 years time horizons. And what we are looking is about what's going to be growth drivers of those industries. And what we see in F&B is that the sectors could be short-term volatile, but for the long terms, it's going up because of the drivers of the population, the spendings of middle class, and also we have the new wave of living culture that people are now working 9 to 5, getting much more busier. So people are eating outside instead of like doing home cooking as 10 years ago. And also now we have food delivery. So there's a lot of like cultural drivers. It's changing and helping the industries and funnel the industry for the next 10 years growth. So we are seeing the industry to have very high competitive from global brands, local brands, some e-commerce players coming into the markets, but that's all the long-term drivers for the growth. So when we look at the industry, we see this field of options that the investors are now looking. So we see that there are a couple of different segments in F&B. Like you have very like mass markets, you have like middle class food chain, and then you have some premium brands. And each of those segments will have different like volatilities, different sentiments across different user base. And what we have seen that is a lot of brands, they go through different stage, and some trends come, some trends go. But if you can build the mix of portfolios, then you can kind of hedge against that kind of risk. And you can be good at product developments, like what we call that, like food R&Ds, and you can build brands upon your like industry's like expertise and industry experience. So the company that we are looking at, and the many strategic investors are looking at, are the company that they can build like multi-brands of food options, different type of segmentations, and different type of like offering, and that can kind of help you to hedge across all that like long-term time horizons of development of your own business. The second way, if we are looking at the industries, is we're seeing the online has been driving the growth in the last 3 years after the COVID-19 has been like changing the markets. So the food concept that we look at typically need to have the online factors in that. Not all F&B brands you can do delivery, but for some of that, for example, like pizza, bubble teas, those are very easy to package, and you can deliver that from your own stores without having a heavy investment into central kitchens. So by building those kind of portfolios, you can hedge against like offline and online business, and you can drive the growth both like in two verticals. So I think in general, like F&B has been challenging sectors, very high competitions, in some way that may be low entry barrier. But if you can build your own portfolios that can hedge against that like short-term trends, and you can drive the online growth, then you can be in pretty good shape.
Thank you, Mr. Viet. You want to add?
Yeah, I think there was. I mean, I think I completely agree with with Viet's sharing there, and I think some other ways that again, I think we all agree. I think F&B is a volatile sector, right? But I think other ways we've seen certain companies, I guess, build more resilience, right, is through, say, expanding into like ready-to-eat meals, right? I mean, I think sometimes we forget that F&B is more than just like restaurants, right? Sometimes that's the immediate thing that comes to mind. But there's, frozen foods, right? Convenience foods, there's snacks, right? There's beverages. I think there's many different directions which these companies can go in, right? So I think, for example, one of our own companies, right, Breakout, has actually expanded into the ready-to-eat meal category, right? And then also begun to export that to the US. And I think that has been a kind of interesting new kind of like revenue and profit driver for the company. So I think that's one. And I think there's definitely a huge trend towards ready to eat, convenience. I think the reasons are obvious. I think Viet also touched on them too, right? Busy lifestyles. I think another interesting area that of course we as maybe an impact investor also interested in is this trend towards sustainability, right? In the F&B industry. That again can take many different formats, right? It can come down to say packaging, for example, right? So more sustainable packaging. It can come down to even, let's say, primary agriculture, right? And sustainable practices in the agricultural value chain, right? So I think, again, I'd love sometimes to, broaden our horizons when we think about F&B, right? Not just in terms of, restaurants, cafes, right? But there's actually a lot of relevant, let's say, associated categories where investors, I would say, are actually quite interested in, right? And are perhaps a bit less volatile than, say, some of the core F&B market.
Thank you. That's so interesting. So because as an entrepreneur, I see that the highlight from your answer is about like, how to say, the sustainability has popped up for a few times. And that also my topic for the next sessions, sharing as well. And I see that for VIG, you have like a variety of like from the restaurant to ready to go business concept. But like for let's say for this year then, I want to ask like what will be as the investors, what will be the concept? Is it like delivery or is it restaurant? What is it you would prefer to be like specific interest in? Yeah.
So I think for us, online has always been one of the good ways to utilize the store investments. So if you're fully relying on offline business, then your catchment area, your ceilings for revenues may be pretty capped with very high rentals. And rental is growing every year. So
especially in Ho Chi Minh City.
Yeah, right, correct, exactly. So one of the best options is to utilize the stores for the online delivery, and that has always been one of our key checkpoints when looking at the brands. How efficient you can do the online through your own website, like own channels, or you can develop that through like strategic partners, for example, Grab and Shopee. But the interesting way will be how you manage the allocations across those channels, and you are not fully relying on just one. It's not about the food platforms, but the commission fee has been increasing every year, and we realize that as well. But that's a good channel for you to do the brandings, and you get the good traffics, and then the way to convert that traffic into your own organic customers. So we are looking at the brands that they can build the customer database from those third-party platforms and convert those into loyalties users. And that's why we have to build our own loyalties apps, and then we share that across all our brands. So that will help you with a lot of like customer retentions. And when we are looking at other brands to acquire, we want to look at the subsectors that can help us on cross-selling. And those will reduce a lot of customer acquisition costs for us. For example, if you already have like fast food, you may have some dining options, you may have some drinks and F&B. So you can spend at our brands at varieties of occasions, and that will help to keep your customers and keep your brand awareness. So that was our second checkpoint. The third one, we are looking at the operation excellencies of the teams, because F&Bs in Vietnam has always been very local. We have always seen the Asian brands to kind of overperform the global brands in terms of efficiencies because of the food taste. So the operating team, they need to have the expertise to keep developing and creating the new brands to catch the new trends and know how to localize the taste to local customers. So having those kind of teams and having the operation team to manage the cost will be one of the like critical checkpoint in the low margin business. So for us in general, it's gonna be the online, it's gonna be the customer loyalties platforms, and then it's gonna be the operation excellency of the teams. And we want to see those checkpoints in the company that we are looking at with some minimum scales of number of stores.
Yeah. Excellent, thank you. And so that also lead a bit to the question 2 that I'm going to touch now, which I want to ask Ms. Shu Yin first then. So what do you think, like what are the key elements of a compelling pitch deck for F&B businesses seeking funding?
Right. I mean, I think the first one, I think we've both touched on it extensively already, right, is really what's that sustainable competitive advantage and the longevity of the business, right? I think as Viet shared, I mean, he's, investing for, up to maybe 10 years, right, as a private equity player. For us, I mean, as a private debt fund, typically we invest for, say, maybe 3 to 4 year time horizons, right? But I think even then, that does require a certain level of, I guess, sustainability and longevity in the business. I think in terms of other aspects beyond that, I think certainly, I have a lot of admiration, I think, for F&B founders, right? I think the operational excellence, right, aspect of running an F&B business is really challenging to get the recipe exactly right. I mean, I think we all know that
especially with restaurants.
Especially with restaurants, right? So with food service, I mean, as you know better than I do, right, the staff turnover, right, is extremely high. It's hard to find that right talent. It's hard to, train them effectively. And really, at the end of the day, it's a service business, right? So how do you deliver that wow experience every time, right, at multiple locations? I think is one thing. I think so. Yeah, there's talent issues. There's around the supply chain, right, like sourcing, quality control. At the end of the day, it's consumers, health and safety, I guess, on the line here, right, in this business. And I think there's no room for error, right, in the food service industry. So I think these aspects of operational excellence, I think it takes time to get right at multiple locations across multiple concepts, right? And we're looking for a team that has the right capabilities, both in terms of people, but also kind of processes, systems to do that. I think I would say those are the big ones that we're looking for. I mean, more from an operational perspective. I think financials, we can, get into that later perhaps, right? But I would say those are some of the things that we really focus on in our due diligence.
Thank you. Mr. Viet, you want to add any more elements?
Yeah, so I think because we have invested in the sectors for a pretty long time, so we are quite open to expose ourselves in different stages of the business. So it's kind of different when you are looking at the company with less than 15 or 20 stores, and for the company that have more than 20 stores, because that's difference of the operational team layers that you have, how you implement the ERP and all that kind of systems. So if you're investing in like the small brands, for us, it's the concentrations of the team to prove the brand concepts and to have the brand loyalties. But if you're looking for above than 20 stores, then you are needing the team to have the capabilities to build the second brands. Yeah, so that's going to be a bit difference between the stage of the business. When you're early stage, you need one brand, but you really need to be dominant and efficient. And for the next stage, you need to build the capabilities of building the teams and building the second brands. So that's kind of difference for us to look at different stage.
And I mean, it brings to mind also, I think that playbook for like new location openings, right, new restaurant openings, I think that's maybe another really critical aspect, right? I mean, I think for us, generally we're looking at companies which have some kind of like proven concept, at least for one brand, right? Do they have a playbook, right? What's the typical time to break even, right, for each new location, right? What's that kind of same store sales growth, right? Just to see, are they, do they really have that proven kind of product market fit, right? Or are they trying to buy growth, right, just through opening very fast without, and use investors' money to do that, I guess, right? So I think that's always something on our minds as we look at different pitch decks and companies.
Thank you. And for the next question, that would be specialized for you. Can you elaborate on the Beacon Fund's criteria for evaluating the creditworthiness and risk profile of F&B businesses in the emerging market?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, happy to get into specific criteria. I guess the first question I think that would be relevant is actually, what is the right source of capital, right, for one's business, right? Because I mean, so obviously we're offering debt, and I think Viet and VIG would be offering kind of equity, right? And I would say equity is predominantly the option that I think most people would think of first, right, when they think about raising capital, I have to say. But why private debt? Why now? Where does it fit in? Right? How is it different from the banks? I guess maybe I should demystify just a little bit some of those questions. So I think private debt essentially is different from. I mean, because here I think if you think about getting a loan, I'm pretty sure you're thinking about getting a bank loan, right? Because that has been the tried and tested option for decades, right? So why would we need something else? So I think the advantage of private debt funds tends to be that, we can come up with maybe a more flexible structure that's tailored to your business's needs, the cash flows of the business. I think, banks, I think they're fantastic, right? They serve a lot of financial needs in the market, right? But they do have to follow a very set, let's say, recipe for each loan, right? Whereas I think we take more of an investor mindset and really craft the right investment product for each of our investee companies. And I think so that's one big difference. I think we're also much more flexible, let's say, when it comes to the collateral package, right, and other aspects of the loan as well. So I think that's, so that's kind of us versus the banks. I guess, why would you even consider taking debt at all, right? I think number one reason why entrepreneurs come to us is basically they want to avoid dilution, right? Or they want to avoid giving up ownership altogether, right? Some entrepreneurs, and I respect their decision, right? They're like, nope, we don't want to take on any outside investors. And so I think that's a very common scenario for us. So I think for for entrepreneurs who, don't want to sell any aspect of their business, right? Or are really sensitive to the dilution aspect, right? Because that can get expensive over time, right? And even I think funds too, they also want to avoid dilution. So sometimes they're some of our best customers in working with their portfolio companies. So I think this is really, reason number one, avoiding dilution. I think number two kind of scenario that we have is, I guess basically they're struggling to attract the attention of VC firms or private equity firms, right? I think, as I touched on in my introduction, honestly, I'm not sure whether VC is a great fit for many F&B models, right? So VCs, they're looking for unicorns, right? Generally speaking, they're looking for companies which can grow, 10, 20, 30 times, right? F&B businesses, especially like restaurants, they do tend to be quite CapEx intensive, right? They're physical locations, you have to build them, out. And that is very different, right, from launching an app, right, where you can achieve kind of hyperscale user growth much more, I wouldn't say easily, but without kind of, the corresponding, let's say, dollar investment, right, in physical kind of assets like fit out, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's on the VC side, right? Private equity, I think, they can be a great fit for F&B businesses, obviously, except I think they typically come in, they're looking for larger check sizes, so typically at like $10 to $20 million, right, even in Vietnam, and that can be out of reach, right, for many business owners, right, who aren't looking to raise that much money today. And I guess, the third reason why I would say people come to us looking for funding is that they are actually interested in getting a loan, but they aren't able to access that from a bank, right? And they don't have essentially the right real estate or cash collateral to post to get the loan that they're looking for. So I guess, so I don't know whether I probably didn't actually answer your question very well, but I think the point here is to illustrate that every investor is looking for different things, right? And I think not all, while I think, capital, and not all sources of capital are equal. So I think the message here being, it's so important, I would say, to really think about what's that right source of capital that fits your, the needs of your business, the cash flows of your business, the exit plans of your business, right? Because all equity investors need an exit, and I think and approach the right investors given those goals.
Thank you. I think it's very clear for the questions, actually. And next question is for Mr. Viet. How does Vietnam Investment Group evaluate investment opportunities in F&B brands, and what role, if any, does technology play in driving growth and innovations for these brands? I think this is a very interesting question.
So I think that we, in like big picture, we consider F&B as the consumer service, consumer sectors, and one of the most important KPI for us will be same-store growth, and the second will be paybacks. Those will be very key financials for us to look at and to see the efficiencies of the business. But now we are changing the way that looking through the tech perspective that can drive and can show the customer loyalties and the customer retentions. Because what we see in the markets is many e-commerce players have been coming into the markets and kind of spoil the customer behavior. So a lot of end users are switching across different type of platforms, but not being in touch with any one in specifics. So what we see at our customer base is we want to kind of track and understand what kind of taste, what kind of brands, what kind of occasions they are going out, and then we try to capture that to be more efficient way. So we now look at the company that they can build the customers' touch points digitally, and they can track that customer touch point to turn into more efficient way of acquiring and retaining those customers. So when we invest in F&B about 10 years ago, we were the first one, like one of the very earliest private equity to implement ERP in our F&B brands. And 5 years ago, we were the first one to do the strategic partnerships with e-commerce food platforms. And now we are trying to be more pioneers in terms of building the digital customer base and exploring the direct online revenue through those customers. So we are now trying to balance the revenue stream between the offline business, the online partnerships, and now the direct channels through online that we can do the delivery through our store networks. So it's kind of the evolvements of the F&B sectors when you have the higher penetrations of digital platforms and all that kind of logistics that can help you to minimize the delivery cost.
Thank you. And can you share some key factors that have contributed to the success of VIG's F&B investments and how you assess the long-term potential of a brand?
So I think that early adoptions of digital tools has been the most critical parts for our F&Bs because we see the huge upgrade in terms of margins when you start implementing the ERP, especially when you have more than 50 stores, because that's supply chain management, inventory management, and part of that will be all the accountings that you can easily track the performance of the business, and then you can make the better decisions. So digital adoptions and across like ERP or like e-commerce has been the key drivers. The second wave we are looking at the long-term growth will be the wave to develop brands and also now to franchise the own brands. So we have started out by being the franchisees of global brands, but now we learn the operations expertise, and now we are creating our own brands, and now we're bringing those own brands globally to the US, for example. So that's the way you are trying to capture the new markets, and you are also hedging through the exposures of the currency risk that you have when a lot of our brands need to import the material from the US or from Australia as well.
Thank you. So I think like that's enough of the questions that from the panel, and I think we still have 5 minutes for the Q&A sections open for the audiences here. So anyone have questions for Mr. Viet and Ms. Chu Yin, please raise your hand. Both in English or Vietnamese is fine. Silent. Sure, like there's a lot of entrepreneurs here. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Timon, and I'm the founder of La Caf. It's a small Vietnamese coffee company. So you were talking about like these sort of support businesses, Xuan. You were talking about these sort of support businesses that are not actually the restaurants, and potential more stability that they can provide also for investors in the sense that they might have that large market fluctuation. Maybe you can expand a little bit on that. Like what kind of investments or investment opportunities would you be looking for? Are they brands like ours, or are they more in like equipment or things like that? Maybe you can expand also a little bit more on that, because I find that quite interesting. And then most of the conversation was about restaurant businesses.
Yeah, I think thanks for thanks for asking that question. I think I really would say it's across different all kinds of things, right? I mean, I think both from equipment, right, and kind of other inputs, right, in that, from, as I said, like I think sustainable packaging, I think is another very interesting one, right, a large area, in the supply chain. I think agriculture, I guess, is another kind of adjacency to F&B, is also an interesting area that we have also invested in, right? So, for example, into an organic rice company. I mean, again, a bit different. Actually, honestly, I have to say, I didn't even initially think of it as an F&B company, but I guess it is, right? And I think yeah, at the end of the day, right, I think to the original point of the panel, right, everyone needs to eat, right? So I think we are quite interested in the agricultural sector as well. I think some of the challenges there, though, I think that's volatile for a different reason. I think that's related to weather events, right? And I think that can be a challenging aspect that we're still looking at different ways to mitigate, right? Whether that can be through insurance, again, like diversification, I guess, across different crops, across different areas. But yeah, I would say, I think different inputs into, equipment, inputs into the F&B kind of ecosystem. I think, primary agriculture is another interesting area. And I think even other service models for F&B, right? So I think we've seen some interesting ones around, ERP, supply chain, right? More kind of like tech solutions for F&B, which is a very critical part of the model. So I think I think I've seen accounting systems specifically for F&B businesses, right? Like integrated with, say, POS and things like that, right? So yeah, I think there's interesting developments across the board, but we sometimes don't get that same limelight.
Thank you. And any more questions? We still have time for one more question. Yeah, please, the girl at the end.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nguyen Anh from Nam Kitchen and Bar. I want to have a question for Mr. Vic. You have mentioned that also you consider about the branding and the vision to open the second brand when you consider to invest in small brands, small F&B brands. So I want to ask, what is the key factor that you evaluate in a F&B brand? Can you help me to answer in marketing and in branding? Thank you.
Sorry, just to clarify the questions a bit, you mean the criteria to access on the second brands, right? Or as the company in general?
Yeah, in general, yes.
So for us to look at the brands, we always look at the customer acquisition cost. So it's different when you are paying your marketing to acquire the new users, or you are paying the marketing to retain the users. We try to break down the marketing components into those kind of spendings. For us, the good brands, you don't need to spend too much to acquire the new customers, to retain the customers, but just to acquire the new customers. So the organic retention should be pretty high, and that's the main criteria when we see the brand adoptions. So the majority of the marketing spends should be focusing on the new customers when you see the retention is high enough. And you need to be able to track those kind of spendings through some self-developed platforms or through some third parties. But if you can see the new acquisitions for each customer start to mature or start to increase rapidly, that seems to have the options of you reach your catchment area of the stores. And that's going to be the second way we look at the brand awareness and the brand attractions. Because if your catchment, that kind of depends on the products, but if your catchment area is kind of like huge or expanding, it drives the message that people are willing to travel to your stores. And if your catchment area is too small, then it's more on the convenience instead of the brand organic attractions. So I think for us, it's going to be the difference between your spendings on what type of customers and what's the catchment areas of your stores. So the better attractions you have from the organic growth is the better for the brands.
Thank you. So I think that it's time for me now to wrap up our discussions by carrying some key takeaways for the audience. First would be the understanding funding options, which is provide a clear we hope that we provide a clear overview of the different funding options available to F&B businesses in Vietnam. And the second is evaluating business readiness. I believe that which is the emphasize the importance of preparing a strong business case and financial projections to attract investor. And the third would be building investor relationships. highlight the value of networking and building relationship with potential investors. And today we have Ms. Suyan and Mr. Viet and a lot of people in here. I'm sure that we have great chance to network in this event. And the last thing would be tailoring funding strategy. Encourage attendees to carefully consider their business goals and needs to select the most appropriate funding strategy. Yeah, and thank you. Thank you, Ms. Suyan, and thank you, Mr. Viet, and thanks everybody.